Okay, I really want to thank Frederick for the invitation, and it's nice to be present in this book launch, although via record and technologically mediated. And first I would actually like to acknowledge the centenary of Paulo Freire, whose birthday was it in the 21st of September. But my topic today is relational sociology as a friendly society. And my talk presents a kind of a mode of subjectification of relational sociology or the relational research community, as it kind of folds relational thinking on itself. And I will examine the constitution of the relational sociology community in relation to the question of the friend or the figure of the friend, and how the relational research community is organized in relation to the question of the friend, which I will analyze within the framework of hospitality. And as the question or the theme is overly broad to be just simply too broad to be examined in this one particular presentation, I will narrow down my focus considerably and use the work of François de Peltoux as a kind of lens through which I will examine this question. And François is one of the co-editors of the book around which this seminar is organized. And actually I take my topic from a characterization of François by Frederick van den Berg, who actually has acknowledged François' key role in sort of bringing out a kind of a disparate group or community of scholars, relational scholars, together, and he's been a kind of a powerful force in bringing these scholars together under the flag of relational sociology. And Frederick writes, without de Peltoux, the relational research community would not have been so relational, and the international network he weaved together would only have been an academic network and not a friendly society. So today in my talk, I'd like to, in a way, explore this further. What would it mean that to examine the relational research community as a friendly society? It's kind of a humble way of honoring both the editors of the volume, but also to look at the constitution of relational sociology as a research community or community of research, and the kind of the preconditions of how can it come together and what it takes to form a community of scholars around relational sociology, and what issues are at stake there. The structure of my talk is threefold. I will start with looking at further what is an invitation, and then I'll move forward to the question of how one creates a hospitable space, hospitable place, which I regard the relational sociology community to constitute, and then look at the constitution of the community from the perspective of unconditional on the one hand and conditional hospitality on the other hand, and the two terms I've taken from Jacques Derrida. Okay, then I'll start with the invitation, and it's just not just as only an arbitrary move to think about invitation, but actually the invitation is something that Francois in his work explicitly makes, that he presents or puts forth an invitation for scholars to join in a conversation, to think about what relational sociology is and what it could become and so on. And he writes in the Palgrave Handbook of Relational Sociology, which he edited, and it came out in early 2018. And I quote that this is an invitation to start a chain of discussion on the ideational and practical characteristics of this intellectual movement, which refers to the worldviews, principles, concepts, methods, and scientific practices of this approach. End of quote. And a bit further in the book, Francois also writes that whatever it is called, this is an invitation for an exploration by fellow travelers. But what does an invitation mean? It's of course an act of hospitality, a hospitable act, and in the book of hospitality, Derrida writes that, or actually remarks in passing, that inviting goes, and I quote, by way of language or the address to the other. And I think Derrida's formulation captures two important aspects of what an invitation is. That first of all, it's tied to language and it needs to be made explicit. There cannot be any, so to speak, implicit invitation. For something to count as an invitation, it can never remain secret. It must always become manifest. And secondly, it relies or depends on the other. It's a relation between the host and the guest. And the host and the guest are relational concepts. A person cannot be a host without a guest whom one welcomes and hosts. And the host and guests are, in a way, co-constituted. And we cannot have one without the other. But to be sure, Francois, while he did invite scholars to join in a conversation, hospitality is not a kind of an explicit theme or question in his work, at least to my knowledge, which he would have examined. But I examine his work here as a kind of on a performative level, and I examine his thinking as hospitality. As he invites people to join in the conversation, he in a way opens up a space to do things together, to actually think about the fate and the identity of relational sociology, but also it's an invitation to build the community, to do togetherness. So to me, there are at least two levels to it. So what in a way I would like to get at with this is a kind of a double exposure in the sense that by looking at the relational research community through hospitality, I think that it provides a revealing analytic lens to understand what the relational research community is and how it's built and how it's come together. And actually looking at the relational research community might teach us something about the notion of hospitality itself and unsettle some accustomed notions or accustomed ways how to understand hospitality. First of all, why I think this is that, like Francois, normally hospitality is considered in the way that it's kind of implicitly it's preceded by a gesture of appropriation, something, or someone says that this is mine, encloses space, and then invites others to join in a way by opening it up after enclosing it, after an appropriation. But Francois doesn't do that actually. Like, relational sociology is his home, but he's not the head of the house, so to speak, but in a way himself as a guest as well. For instance, he openly acknowledges that the field of relational sociology has been established by people like Pier Paolo Donati and Emir Bayer, but they themselves haven't, in a way, created it out of emptiness or out of nothing, but they themselves actually rely on the work of Dewey, Simmel, Todd, Elias, and so on. So all this, I think, in a way, unsettles any fixed distinction or division between the host and the guests. The hosts are themselves guests in the way that what they produce and what they contribute are actually, in a way, responses to preceding initiatives or invitations. And to me, this offers us a possibility also to think about the notion of hospitality, or what hospitality is, in different terms rather than how it's usually perceived. Like, could we actually think the place or the space of hospitality that it's constituted by the gesture of welcoming, and instead of belonging to the host or the guest, that one needs to have the rights of the sovereign to be able to invite someone to one's own space. But could it actually be a space of betweenness or space of in-between instead? And next, I'll go to the question of unconditional and unconditional hospitality. And before this, I was, in a way, examining the question of hospitality from the perspective of the host, basically, from Francois' position, or what qualifies one to be a host. But since the hospitality is a relation between the host and the guest, it's also important to explore the question that to whom does one offer hospitality? And of course, to whom is an invitation addressed, and to whom is Francois' invitation to relational scholars or to scholars addressed, and who counts as kind of a friend of relational sociology, who is eligible to join in and who is not, and who can be invited to or included in the community, and can we be absolutely inclusive, or is there an element of exclusion involved as well? And I find it fruitful to look at this question from the perspective of the two notions of unconditional hospitality and unconditional hospitality. And usually hospitality is considered as kind of it in a way precedes or presumes or assumes that the guest is in a way identified, or that one must identify oneself, or in a way not just each and everyone or whomever is invited, but in a way, like, for instance, just not to, so that we don't remain strangers, we ask the other person to tell their name or whatever. But Francois, in a way, the invitation that he presents, in a way, as I read, it kind of welcomes the whomever, basically whomever, and it's in a way offers hospitality before the gist of identification or the necessity of identification, and before interrogating the other, who their name is and do they have the right credentials and so on. And to me, in that sense, the invitation that he puts forth can be thought in terms of the unconditional hospitality. And for instance, he writes in the Palgrave Handbook of Relational Sociology that the community of relational sociologists should be an open society instead of a closed one. But he's not a kind of a naive idealist in the sense that we would just kind of in a way, we don't have to think of the identity of the community, even if he seems to, in a way, abstain from distinguishing between invited and uninvited guest, or guest and enemy, or friend and enemy, or guest and parasite, and so on. Since he acknowledges that full openness actually would destroy the existence of any approach and any community, and the community of relational sociologists as well. So in that sense, he introduces the element of selection and the limit or the border and exclusion. And he actually writes that relational sociology cannot become a Tower of Babel with no common language or some sort of anomic pseudo group of people which would all use the label relational in their own way according to their own desire. This would be a kind of there would be no order, no community with an identity, but utter chaos, basically. So there's kind of a tension between, in a way, intellectual protectionism and, on the one hand, an openness to authority on the other hand. And what makes this question difficult, to my understanding, is that we cannot, in a way, just, in a way, choose either one of the other. Well, they are, in a way, closely related, intimately interrelated, the two notions of embracing difference on the one hand and protecting identity on the other hand. They, in a way, simultaneously presuppose and exclude each other. And that makes the question quite difficult. And to me, to understand hospitality and to build kind of a living community of relational scholars as a friendly society, both of these notions need to be included and acknowledged as the components of a hospitable space. That was basically it. Thank you very much.